A reading from the book of Genesis. Jacob got up at night and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. The word of the Lord.
So all through this stewardship season, we're going to be reflecting on how we do that, how we seek and share God's healing love. Now, for some of you with a bit of a history of church stewardship seasons, your first reaction to all this might well be, okay, we get it, time to write the budget, cut to the chase, let's make the pitch, And you'd be right that stewardship relates to giving, clearly, right? But the church, can sometimes go too far and reduce the message of stewardship to little more than financial giving. And by the same token, sometimes we overcorrect and get a little too cute with it all and make it seem like, oh, stewardship isn't about money at all. But I need a pledge, But, you cut down to it. Here's the thing. At least to me, stewardship is about nothing less than how we live our lives. It matters that much. It's about looking to God's model, especially as revealed in Jesus, and doing our best to live that model ourselves. So that means tending all that God shares with us in the same way that God tends everything else, which is with self-giving love. And so because money is part of how we live our lives, our stewardship season will include how we tend money, how we tend that gift from God. And because the church is an instrument for sharing healing love, we'll talk about how we support the church's work financially. But all of that is in the context of something much greater, which is the project of seeking and sharing God's healing love, which I think is what the church and, frankly, our lives are all about. So you'll see and hear several love stories from parishioners over the next 6 weeks, both here in person on Sundays and coming to your inbox. Stories of a variety of ways, all kinds of ways, that God's love sets the direction for us day by day. Okay, so with all that about sharing God's healing love, you might think that the Old Testament reading today about Jacob's wrestling match would be like the last story you would ever pick for this beginning of this campaign. Because healing love, really? This is the story when God, presumably, knocks Jacob's hip to such a degree that he dislocates it, right? Doesn't really sound like healing love. Now, the truth is, I don't pick these readings, just by the way. I don't sit there, the week before going, oh, I'd really love to read the story of Jacob this week. These are appointed for us by the schedule of readings that the Episcopal Church follows. So this is just kind of what came up, but maybe there's something worth exploring here after all. Maybe a little uncomfortable love for us this morning. So this is a story about Jacob the wrestler, right? I do not look like a wrestler. I absolutely freely admit that, but I am. And I would bet that perhaps you are too, if you dig deep. At least I bet you're a wrestler like Jacob was. So, okay, little backstory, because we have this reading this morning that sort of comes out of nowhere. But the backstory is, for this wrestling match, that Jacob is the son of the Hebrew patriarch Isaac and the grandson of the patriarch Abraham. And he's a twin with an older brother, Esau, who rightly should have been next in line, should have been Abraham and Isaac and Esau. But earlier in the story, Jacob has stolen Esau's birthright of his father's blessing, which of course has driven the brothers apart. And God has assured Jacob that this blessing begun with Abraham and continued with Isaac will pass down to him, because he's the one who carries Isaac's blessing into the next generation, which may not make a lot of sense to us, but you sort of have to let go of that and just, okay, that's how it worked in the day. And practically in that moment, then, Jacob needs to skedaddle to get out of the road of Esau's wrath. So he heads off to a different country to find a wife, north to Haran, in upper Mesopotamia, basically. Now that is a whole story itself, which we won't get into now, with Jacob the trickster being tricked by his father-in-law and ending up with 2 wives at twice the cost. But now, so fast forward to where we are in the story now, Jacob has settled up with his father-in-law and is returning home, bringing both wives and all their kids and all of his livestock and possessions back to the promised land. And as he's crossing back, as we meet him in today's reading, he's about to be intercepted by Esau. So he spends this night alone, tortured by the fear that Esau is going to come and kill him, and I would imagine tortured by guilt for having stolen the blessing that should have been Esau's in the first place. So Jacob finds himself praying like never before, begging God to protect him. And in Jacob's long night, a man comes, the story says, a man comes and wrestles with him. Okay, so we want to make sure we have the story in our heads right, so we ask, who is this man? And that's the question, isn't it? Who is this man wrestling in the middle of the night? Is this a marauder trying to steal from Jacob? Or an angel representing God? Or a demon representing that which stands against God? Or is it Jacob himself as he wrestles with his guilt and fear and failure in his role as inheritor of God's blessing? I mean, it isn't clear, much like our own experience of the angels or demons or shadow sides of us that come with us through our long nights. But eventually, the story tells us the anonymous wrestler is not prevailing. So he knocks Jacob's hip out of joint, an injury that Jacob is not going to soon forget. But still, Jacob hangs on, refusing to quit until the wrestler gives in, actually, and blesses Jacob. The wrestler does this, obliges, and offers a blessing, but not just that. He also gives Jacob a new identity. That he's no longer Jacob, a name that means he supplants, like taking the place of his brother. Now he's to be called Israel, a name that means either the one who strives with God or God strives. So, which is it? Yes. I kind of think it's yes. I think the answer is both, that Jacob is striving with God and God is coming right back and striving with him. I mean, this is a crazy story, right? Maybe reminding us of dreams that we've had. Feels much more like a dream than a report. But this moment for Jacob then begins to make sense, strangely enough, when you know what happens immediately next. So morning breaks, and hobbled and exhausted, Jacob looks up and sees his brother Esau coming toward him with 400 men. This is not an encouraging sign, right? Jacob is expecting annihilation at this point. What he gets instead is reconciliation. Because Esau, the brother who's got every reason to carry a grudge, runs to Jacob and embraces him and weeps with him. And Jacob tries to give Esau the goods that he's brought along to kind of buy him off. And Esau says, no, let me help you instead, because you look like you've had a heck of a night. And the story ends with Jacob just dumbstruck, saying to Esau, "Why should my Lord be so kind to me?" And the word Lord there is intended like sir, like a mark of deference to his older brother, but I kind of think the double entendre is intentional. Why indeed should the Lord be so kind to Jacob, the trickster? So like I said, this rings true for me at least. I'm also a wrestler with God. And I would bet that I am not alone, just a guess. I mean, this dark and mysterious and ancient story still rings true, I think, because many of us have found ourselves in Jacob's sandals. I mean, however it's worked out for you, I imagine you might find some resonance in this narrative. Maybe we've been carrying something heavy, carrying it for a long time. It might be our fault or not. It might be a single thing, or it might be more complicated baggage. But whatever, we've been carrying it a long time. And then at some point, we find ourselves at the end of our rope and beg God, please to help us with this weight we've been hauling around. So we beg for protection or healing or a fix. And we probably have a pretty clear sense of what it is we're asking for, thinking that we know exactly what we need. But the thing is, God the healer does not always come back with the treatment that we self-prescribe. In fact, the treatment may not make much sense, may not be anything we ever wanted. But the mystery is the outcome becomes so much more than what we asked. Not just pain relief, but healing. Not just safety, but a new start. Not just self-preservation, but reconciliation. Like your life healed. So in this crazy story where God the physician knocks Jacob's hip out of joint, where is this healing love that we'll be hearing about for the next 6 weeks? At least as I see it, it's this: that God showed up. And I don't mean just showing up, in some sweet and gentle storybook way, sort of Glenda the Good floating down to comfort Dorothy and Oz, God showed up and gave it to Jacob every bit as good as Jacob could dish it out. Because in that moment, Jacob didn't need Glenda the Good drifting down to heal him. Jacob needed a wrestler. Jacob needed the Rock to come and knock some sense into him. And so a wrestler is what God became. At least to me, the divine thing about God's healing love is that it comes in really surprising ways. Some of the moments when I have known God's presence most immediately were times I would never have chosen. Times of endings or injuries that seemed beyond repair. No, I didn't want to be where I was, and I didn't want the treatment I heard God offering. That blessing from God might have felt kind of grudging in the moment, and I certainly was grudging in my receiving of it. But in the end, the outcome was gracious. Healing in ways that I could never have asked for. For even in my wrestling match, I knew it was God who'd shown up. And just that is healing balm for your soul.